from your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Hi everyone, welcome to a new Sox Machine Live. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, alongside the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis, as we are streaming live on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SoxMachine on this wonderful Thursday evening, July 20th in 2023. Quite a bit to talk about in this live stream. The Chicago White Sox just wrapped up their series against the New York Mets. They lost 2 out of 3, but there is some signs of life, especially from Tim Anderson. We'll talk about that. Michael Kopech bounces back. Great to see. But Lucas Giolito has a really rough outing against the New York Mets, and I'm curious on how that could possibly impact his trade market, if there's any impact. We'll also talk about Andrew Vaughn. There's some injury news regarding Andrew Vaughn. Of course, why not? But there's also some trouble and gauging his progress this season against spin, especially against right-handed pitching. So we'll look at how he is progressing in 2023, his third season. And we'll ask the question of where are the trades, because the trade market's been pretty slow right now in Major League Baseball. And we'll end with previewing the upcoming series as the Chicago White Sox end this 9-game road trip in Minneapolis. But Jim, the White Sox go to Queens. Game 1 is wild. Much closer than it probably should have been, as the White Sox were down 11-4, but they make a late rally and lose 11-10. Justin Verlander, that was like a vintage Verlander start against the White Sox. Just nothing going on for the White Sox offensively other than a Luis Roberts solo home run. And then they win the third game against old friend Jose Quintana. Even got a chance to see another old friend, Omar Narvaez, for the Mets, as he hit a home run against Michael Kopech. So there's a lot going on in this series. And that seems to be the case when the White Sox, whenever they travel to Queens, it seems to be like a memorable mid-season series. Any big takeaways for you watching these 3 games for the White Sox against the Mets this week?
Nice to see some signs of life from the offense. You know, having that big 10-run outburst, even though they needed 11 to get the game to extra innings. At least it could have been worse. The game could have been over quickly, and it wasn't. So that's fine. Also, like the way they converted their scoring opportunities against Jose Quintana early and then against the bullpen later, like that was nice. So seeing more signs of confidence in the offense and just, beyond Andrew Benintendi, like Tim Anderson, as you mentioned, coming around, Luis Robert doing his thing. Yasmani Grandal looked a little bit refreshed by the All-Star break. Maybe he needed a little bit of a recharge, and he seems to have gotten that. So far, like, it's a deeper lineup. Still has the same problems of not being able to draw walks and impatience and whatnot. But at least it's like a better form of what they currently have, which should have been able to score some runs on a more regular basis, except for Tim Anderson being largely absent.
Before we get into the White Sox part, the Mets, just real quick. After watching these 3 games, do you have a better understanding of why the Mets have been struggling this season?
Well, yeah, I think bullpen is one of them. Just, the starters being weaker than they thought and the bullpen being weaker than they thought, and the weaker starters exposing the weaker bullpen, around it goes. I think that's a big part of it. Defense doesn't look great either, which contributes to the run prevention issues that they have. And it looks like they need a little bit of time to figure out their lineup too, but really it just seems like the pitching or the run prevention not really coming together the way they thought. And, Justin Verlander being hurt, Jose Quintana being hurt, missing time early, didn't help. So that's my general sense of it. And the White Sox looked like a cleaner team. I think that's the other surprising thing is, like, defensively, they were fine. Like Oscar Colas made some nice plays in right field, looking a little bit more confident out there. Like Zach Remillard showing his value, Tim Anderson making plays. So yeah, it's weird that you come away from a series and the White Sox look more confident and composed defensively, but there you have it.
Even though the Mets won this series, I still feel like they should sell. Like, I don't think they're good enough to catch Philadelphia, Miami, or Atlanta in the National League East, or run down any of the teams that are ahead of them in the wild card. So I could see some Mets being offloaded, especially like Tommy Pham, for a lot of teams that are looking for right-handed hitting. especially in the outfield. I could see Tommy Pham being moved. I don't think the Mets are going to sell off big time, but the guys that have expiring contracts, I could see the Mets sell, which is a far cry from what I expected of this New York Mets team before the season. So even though they won this series against the White Sox, I don't feel great for them. Going to the Chicago White Sox and starting with game 1 of this series, big surprise. Lucas Giolito in that first inning, I think he would want to redo because I get like the time off excuse. There's a lot of time in between starts. He started the last game for the White Sox before the All-Star break. He completely misses the Atlanta Braves series. So you got that All-Star break plus another 4 days of rest. And then he makes his start. So it's a lot of time off, and he just looked completely out of rhythm. And I never thought he got into rhythm. I think Frank Thomas and Ozzie were trying to say in the post game that he looked better in the third inning on. Giolito only lasted 3 2/3 innings against the Mets. Like nothing was really working. The changeup was probably the best looking pitch that he had. But we'll break it down in the StatCast here for Lucas Giolito. For those that are watching the YouTube stream, for those listening to the podcast, Giolito went 3 2/3 innings. He allowed 6 hits, 8 earned runs because 3 of those 6 hits were home runs. He walked 5 and he struck out 5. So he had 11 outs and he allowed 11 base runners. Not a good ratio. And the way Giolito tried to attack the Mets in that game, Grifol had him throw 100 pitches. It was 36 four-seam fastballs, 34 changeups, 24 sliders, and a few curveballs, which we don't see too often from Giolito. But out of the four-seam fastballs, the Mets swung at that pitch 13 times, and they only whiffed twice. And they swung at 12 sliders, and they only whiffed twice. So the Mets were on the four-seam fastball and slider for Lucas Giolito. Again, Giolito had more success with the changeup as he had a 39% whiff rate against Mets hitters with that pitch. So out of all the StatCast data, the changeup's the only one that stands out in a positive way for Lucas Giolito. And it does raise the question, like, I don't think it was such a terrible start that, oh my gosh, Lucas Giolito has no trade market. But after that particular start, I could see teams waiting to see on how he bounces back on regular rest on Sunday against the Minnesota Twins. Like, I really was wondering if Giolito had a great start against the Mets or just a regular start against the Mets, because teams need starting pitching so bad that he could be dealt shortly after Tuesday's start. But I think everyone's going to wait until Sunday.
Yeah, if you go back to the chart, like the fastballs, it was 13 swings, but only like 9 takes, I believe, 6 takes. So 6 called strikes out of 36 pitches. Like he was spraying his fastball, and like a lot of just non-competitive pitches. It wasn't a case where like his best stuff was getting beat. His best stuff wasn't there, especially when you factor in command, like velocity down a little bit, but within like the standard deviation range of just ups and downs for a pitcher. It was just really his command. And I can see like the case of it being, maybe he did find a better rhythm, but by that time fatigue was kicking in because he had to throw so many pitches early that all of a sudden like the 6th inning, 7th inning flatness showed up in the 3rd and 4th instead. But I can see like, given that the market really isn't moving in general, like teams can wait a little bit. Sometimes you have the teams making the case where like, we need every start possible. And perhaps like if he did have a good start, they'd say like, I want one more of that Giolito start that we normally get by waiting until July 31st or whatever date they determine. But in this case, like, just might be a little bit of wait and see, because we have seen him have starts where he gets his butt kicked and bounces back just fine. Like I'm thinking that Boston Massacre start, the morning start a couple of years ago, like that was pretty terrible, but then that turned out to be an aberration. But with, nothing moving, like teams can just say like, I just want to make sure it's an aberration because he's had like last year and the year that was the subject of commercials of him being the worst pitcher in baseball. Like he's had some extended lows. So I think it's worth the due diligence process for teams saying like, let's just make sure he's not falling into that unless like the market all of a sudden heats up. But, he's not the only rental pitcher on the markets. He's not the only pitcher on the market. Like, teams could just be looking beyond the rental and look for guys with more than a year left. But, yeah, just his tendency to take big dips and stay there, even if it is just, a couple years out of the last 5, is still probably a little bit too present to feel like, yeah, it's nothing. Especially if you're like, if you have choices and you have like 10 days or something like that to actually like make up your mind, like may as well take your time, unless all of a sudden 3 pitchers come off the board and he's like the best one left.
What I think helps is that the following afternoon, the game between the Baltimore Orioles and Los Angeles Dodgers, I was watching that game, and in that first inning, my fears were calmed down. That was a really rough first inning for Baltimore and Dodgers pitching. That was Julio Urias making the start for the Dodgers and Dean Kremer making the start for Baltimore, and both of those guys struggling out of the gate. So I don't think Giolito's market is going to be impacted that much. It's just more of a timing thing. Like if he was great against the Mets on Tuesday, maybe he gets dealt in like the next 24 hours. But I think teams are going to wait until Sunday. And the more teams wait to pull the trigger and meet Han's asking price for Lucas Giolito, more opportunity for other teams, other sellers to emerge, and other starting pitchers to come into the market. And that could possibly complicate things as far as moving Lucas Giolito. So hopefully against Minnesota, we'll talk about that series later in the show. Lucas Giolito bounces back. Speaking of bouncing back, Michael Kopech started today's game and looked much better against the New York Mets than he did against the Atlanta Braves. And it was a very good sign to see as we take a look at the StatCast data for those watching on YouTube, for those listening to the podcast. Michael Kopech only threw 89 pitches, 60 four-seam fastballs. Very fastball heavy from Lucas Giolito. His max pitch velocity on the four-seamer was 97 miles per hour. He averaged 95, which is good. His slider, he threw that 21 times, and he threw 8 changeups, mixed it in. Out of the 21 swings against the fastball, Kopech only generated 5 whiffs, but he did get 14 called strikes with the four-seam fastball. So I think the Mets' hitting strategy against Michael Kopech, Jim, was to wait him out. And with him being aggressive early and living in the strike zone, really helped out because he went 5 2/3 innings, only allowed 2 hits, 1 earned run, which was a solo home run. He did walk 4 batters, but he had 5 strikeouts. And like I mentioned, this is a much better start than the last one we saw in Atlanta.
Yeah, it seemed like he contained his control problems to individual hitters. We've seen, like say, go back to Giolito's start, and he had just deep counts and walks and missed pitches to basically everybody. In this case, like Kopech had a tendency to lose a batter, but shaking it off, correcting his mechanics, and limiting it to like that 1 walk per inning or the 1 bad batter per inning. So that's, I think, where the strategy of just like waiting for balls. I think probably he might have confused the scouting report a little bit by saying like, yeah, I'm crazy. I'm all over the place. Ha ha ha. And then like all of a sudden, like correcting a batter in, all of a sudden they're down 0-2. So that worked. And, his velocity like down a half tick, but like, again, within the standard deviation of normal, and his control was in the standard deviation of normal. Even if he walked 4, like it was fine. I think what you'd like to see, given that we've seen Kopech be terrible, now we've seen Kopech have this kind of ordinary good starts, but maybe if like Tim Anderson doesn't catch that Tommy Pham rocket and like turn into a double play, that maybe it's a case where like there's a crooked number and it starts shorter. That's a case where the defense helped him out. But I think it'd be nice in short order to have like a Michael Kopech outstanding start where that fastball is just pushing hitters around. He's getting swings and misses, pop-ups, really doing nothing with it, just to balance out the, terrible starts on one side and then like the elite fastball starts on the other side. Because if he settles into this where he's, good 5 to 6 innings once in a while, but dragged down by these 2, 3, in this case, 2/3 of an inning start his last time out, like that makes it a little bit harder to feel like you can pencil him in. So I'm hoping that there's, if he's going to have these wild variations, hopefully he'll get back to the form, like just having wild variations in the positive direction where like he looks like a world beater and nobody can touch him.
Yeah, Kopech's next probable start is at home Wednesday night against the Chicago Cubs in that 2-game crosstown series between the Cubs and the White Sox. So We'll see. And I think that's just kind of like the holding pattern right now with Michael Kopech. And we would all love more consistency, but for at least the 2023 season, I'm just preparing myself, again, preparing for the worst, hoping for the best with Michael Kopech. Like, maybe tonight he looks like that he should be in the bullpen, but be prepared that he could surprise you and be an effective starter. And we've seen earlier this season, especially against Kansas City and Cleveland, where Michael Kopech was elite. It's just like the results could vary greatly for Michael Kopech. And against the Mets, when he was aggressive in the strike zone, he looks a lot better. So I like this strategy the White Sox had for Michael Kopech, and it did catch the Mets batters off guard because I think that they were going to expect the wild Kopech, and if he can command his fastball like he did, I like his chances against the Cubs at home next week. And again, we'll preview that series later this weekend on the Monday podcast, as I don't know if anyone's excited anymore in Chicago about the White Sox Cubs series, but we'll try our best to drum up excitement for that Crosstown Classic. Woo! Another guy that's bouncing back and showing some life post All-Star break has been Tim Anderson. And you wrote about Anderson on SoxMachine.com, Jim, and I highly recommend everyone reading Jim's work at his column regarding Tim Anderson and how Anderson is showing life. In the last 7 games for the White Sox, Tim Anderson is 9 for 29, and that's a .310 batting average. Not a lot of extra base hits still. His slugging percentage during that stretch is just .345. But he is showing more life. He is getting more singles. Again, it is 9 hits in his last 29 at-bats. And is this a sign things are turning around, Jim, to the point that I think you were trying to make the case that maybe we should consider seriously Tim Anderson gets moved before the deadline?
It's possible, just because the market's pretty slim both now and then the off season. So when it comes to like the winter, I think there might be motivation for teams to try to win the lottery. You know, if they feel like they're gambling a little bit on Anderson's use the rest of the season, like at least like they're saying like, well, if we win this bet, we'll also have our shortstop taken care of for next year, right, or second baseman, however they want to use them. Like that option, I think, has some value, especially like if it doesn't work out, then like, just, cut him loose. And so I think that gets baked into his trade value a little bit. Also, like, makes it easier for the White Sox to, have a price to meet, because like if he is coming back and teams are lowballing him, say like, yeah, we'll give you like some 20-year-old A-ball prospect who's like 21st in our system. Like, no, we're not that desperate. Like we have at-bats that need to be taken in next year's team. We have a whole winter to trade him. We have like a whole market that we can perhaps build up if he's not that great, or if he bounces back to life in August and September and looks even better than he did in July. Like White Sox have options too. So I think there's reason for teams to up their offers a little bit. Also some leverage for the White Sox to say like, yeah, how bad do you want him? How bad do you want that option for next season? So that's worth seeing. I think my biggest question with Anderson is like, we're seeing the pulled line drives to the left side, which I think is one big part of his game, even if most of his homers go the opposite field. I think my question is, and next homestand might be able to tell a little bit better, since his, the home ballpark and the home like wind patterns are so much more friendly to his right field power, his right field fly balls, and other parks are. But I just want to see like, can he challenge the wall for his first homer of the season? Because like looking at spray charts from previous years and how many homers went to right field, if that baseball is really killing right-handed power, or like right-handed opposite field power, I should say, then, one, you can understand why he went to drive line to try to tap into his pull power, because that's not happening for him. And also I think that just kind of even if the White Sox hold on to him and try to wait till next winter to deal him, like that could ultimately cap just how interested teams are, because like he might be a single-digit home run guy if those right field home runs have just kind of disappeared on him because of the way the baseball flies now. Yeah,
when you talk about spray charts, it makes me a little sad, because when you look at his 2019 and 2020 spray charts, and I know it's a super bouncy ball in 2019, but the majority of his home runs were pulled. Mm-hmm. I don't know what led to the strategic decision for Tim Anderson to go more into right center and more opposite field with this power. But when you look at his spray charts for 2019, 2020, where that was his best offensive seasons by far, he pulled the ball in the air, especially against sliders from right-handed pitching. I wish he would go back to that version of Tim Anderson, but maybe it requires him to be on a different team and him having more of an open mind and the adjustments that team would have for Tim Anderson. But on the topic of possibly trading Tim Anderson, do you think the White Sox have much of an appetite to actually move Tim Anderson prior to the deadline?
I don't think so. I think it's more of a case of just the writing being on the wall in terms of their aspirations for next year, what they feel like they can build a team towards if they're cutting so much payroll, or if they have to take a step back, or they have 3, possibly 4 rotation spots to fill that like they just may get a jump on dealing him. I think that conversation was more open in May when he figured like a turnaround's coming, right? Turnaround's coming. He's going to hit a homer. He's going to the ball's going to start flying for him again. He's going to be one of the top 10 shortstops in baseball again. And that just didn't happen. So like, I think that's why, it's more the circumstances of like Anderson's numbers being terrible for most of the season and just this turnaround being too late arriving to probably make enough of an impact on teams' minds for July 31st or the start of August and liking, their chances of getting that kind of productivity the rest of the way. But I think the conversation kind of like similar to Dylan Cease, like when we talk about him and how most pitchers of his caliber are moved with like more than 1 year of control left. They tend to be moved like when there's at least one full season beyond the season of acquisition that teams can plan around. I think, the White Sox are reaching the point where like, man, next year is it. And then they probably have to go in a different direction, not just because Anderson may want more money, but because of his skill set and, being in his 30s, like how well is that going to age? Probably a case where like you do have to think of a different shortstop. So that's why I think like it made sense to think about it. And the White Sox should still have an open mind about it. But, if it gets to the point where like teams are just like lowballing them or saying like, yeah, let's see how desperate they are to move them. They shouldn't be desperate to move them now.
Yeah. If I'm a betting man, I would bet that Tim Anderson does not get dealt prior to the trade deadline. But what would change my mind is if someone starting shortstop gets hurt, like the Dodgers. If the Dodgers have another significant injury at shortstop, or maybe the Dodgers are trying to think of getting both Giolito and Tim Anderson. They've done that in the past. You wrote about that, like the Scherzer Trey Turner deal. The Dodgers have done that in the past, where they've gotten a starting pitcher and a starting shortstop with the same deal. Maybe they would be interested in doing that. Who knows? But at the very least, it is nice to see Tim Anderson start building up to something. It's a lot of singles still, but again, he's 9 for his last 29 in the last 7 games. He is showing some life. Let's see if he continues this weekend in Minneapolis. Before we get into our next topic, a little site news here for our Sox Machine store. We have new gear. We have a new t-shirt. I've been asked about this because I've worn the prototype at White Sox games. Everybody knows our affinity, Jim, about wild pitch offense and how much we love it. So we do have a t-shirt now, since everyone's been asking me to make these because of the t-shirt that I have. The I Heart Wild Pitch Offense. So if you love wild pitch offense as much as we do at Sox Machine, you can now show that love in the Sox Machine shop. You can buy the shirt available. So go to soxmachine.com, click on the store, and you can purchase the new I Heart Wild Pitch Offense shirt. It can be cool just like me at White Sox games. And when there's wild pitch offense at home, you can show everyone your shirt and show the love of wild pitch offense. We do
still want to sponsor that. I still want to sponsor run scoring and wild pitch, just like the Feldco walk. Can't be that much because it's not that frequent, but I'd like to capitalize on that, those opportunities when they present themselves.
We have also joked about sponsoring every pitch visit during the season. I think that would be a little too much money, but I do like the idea of Jay Spadetti having to read our sponsored ad for every wild pitch offense, especially at a walk-off win. That would be awesome. What a win for the White Sox. And here's the sponsor ad. That's great television broadcasting.
You don't want to get Marquette Banks copywriter just to write the really clunky 60-word promo that talks about neighborhoods and fun rewards like fraud protection. Like peak Marquette Bank of just really like you needed an editor and didn't have one and went with it. And Steve Stone had to read it every single time. You could just hear the contempt dripping from his voice when he talked about fun rewards. Pause. Like we need a promo that Steve Stone hates.
We could think of something.
Yeah.
We could think of something. So if you want to aid us in being able to have enough money to buy sponsored ads, you can also help us out at patreon.com/SoxMachine so we can build up those funds. All right, the next topic, a little bit of injury news because it's the White Sox. Somebody's always hurt. This comes from Daryl Van Schouwen of the Chicago Sun-Times. He initially tweeted out that Andrew Vaughn was getting an X-ray on his left foot today. Manager Pedro Grifol said, quote, "We're not anticipating anything wrong, but he was pretty sore," end quote. And then later on, Daryl Van Schouwen reported that the X-ray for Andrew Vaughn is negative. He has a left foot bruise. He is day-to-day, just like everyone else. And Andrew Vaughn, I think we need to have a little bit of a conversation regarding Andrew Vaughn, because this is his third season. And this surprised me. I was starting a deep dive, data dump. Here's something that I've been monitoring for a while now with Andrew Vaughn, and that is Vaughn's trouble against the spin, especially from right-handed pitching, because Vaughn's going to see more right-handed pitching than left-handed pitching over the course of a season. And this is something that he desperately needed to improve upon. And here's a stat that I couldn't believe. Andrew Vaughn's got more career plate appearances than Luis Robert. Did you know that, Jim?
I didn't, but it's surprising and then not.
Right, because of injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why Vaughn's got more plate appearances than Robert. But technically speaking, Andrew Vaughn has more experience at the plate than Luis Robert Jr. Now, far cry in offensive production this year between Luis Robert and Andrew Vaughn. And I'm not going to do a numbers dump for our podcast listeners. That's not very attractive listening. So for those that are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see as far as some of the visuals that I have created for Vaughn against the spin. And I'm just going to generalize this for the audio listeners. So Vaughn in his rookie year hit 155 batting average against sliders from right-handed pitching. And that improved a little bit in 2022, but he was batting 185 against sliders from right-handed pitching. And it's clear this is his kryptonite at the plate. It has improved a little bit in 2023. He's hitting 224 against sliders from right-handed pitching. But the one thing, even though there has been progress year over year, is that Vaughn's only slugging 293 against sliders from right-handers. And he's now whiffing 38.8% of the time. And his average exit velocity against sliders is 89 miles per hour, where his fastball average exit velocity is like 95 miles per hour. So here we are, the third season in. I wanted to see progress from Andrew Vaughn against spin. And to make things worse for him and all the batters in Major League Baseball, the sweeper data is just uglier. So if a right-handed pitcher throws the slider with more horizontal movement, Andrew Vaughn's batting 129 against sweepers. So if you are watching a White Sox game and Andrew Vaughn's in a lineup and you see a right-handed pitcher on the mound and Steve Stone or the color commentator says that this pitcher has a sweeper, that is really bad news for Andrew Vaughn, because he's whiffing 41.7% of the time against sweepers. And the last stat that really shocked me this year, Andrew Vaughn is batting 188 when he's ahead in the count. And he's slugging just 400. Andrew Vaughn is posting his best numbers when the count is even, like the first pitch or 1-1 or 2-2. that is when Vaughn is doing his most damage. When he's ahead, he's hitting 188. Like that's just weird to me. And when the pitcher's ahead, he's hitting 250. And he's got a higher slugging percentage. He's slugging 404 when he's behind in the count. So just some really weird stuff coming from Andrew Vaughn. And again, Vaughn right now is dealing with a foot bruise, so that's not going to make things better. But this is his third season. He's got over 1,400 plate appearances. And I go back to my draft report back in 2019 when I highlighted a concern that I had that I don't know on how Vaughn is going to handle breaking pitches when he becomes a professional. He didn't get a lot of chance in the minor leagues to show that he made improvement. He gets shoved into the major leagues, and here we are now in 2023, Jim. And I am concerned to the point that I don't know if he's ever going to get better against spin, that he may just only be a fastball hitter, and that's really going to limit his offensive production.
Yeah. Next slide. No, it's part of it feels like, you mentioned that, Vaughn has more plate appearances in the majors than Robert has, but Robert has like 3 to 4 times the experience in the minors. So professionally, they're probably even if you weight them, or Robert's slightly ahead, but just the hard earned lessons, some of which Robert had to learn in the minors, like Vaughn never really had that opportunity. Like it's been all like at the major league level, against the world's best pitching, against the world's best sliders, like figuring out year after year. And just there's some incremental progress. Take sweepers out of it, maybe not. But just we're watching it. We're just kind of sitting there just being like, okay, a little bit better. But also clock's ticking. Both comes the White Sox contention windows, the way the White Sox have prioritized him, the way his own, he's going to be entering arbitration. He's going to be getting older, and who knows like how he'll age. If his old player skills aren't really coming up right now, like, and if he doesn't look like he's gonna be drawing a ton of walks or what have you, and if he's not running all that well, like how is he gonna age? It's kind of scary to think about. So it seems like the White Sox pretty much thought he was ready-made as a hitter. The other thing I guess I'll go back to is like, same thing with Tim Anderson, opposite field homers. Like I think they counted on more opposite field homers from him. And he doesn't really have either the swing or the levers to get the ball out to right field, like the plate coverage on the outside corner or just off the plate. Like maybe he just doesn't have the reach that other hitters do in getting that kind of just leverage with their swing to flip the ball out to right field. So if he needs to like rip the ball more, then it makes sense that like he needs the ball closer to him to get that, barrel around into it to lift the ball like to center field and left. So it could be a case where like, his swing looked like it was capable of all fields power, but if the ball changed, all of a sudden you need a little bit more strength and just natural like exit velocity and backspin on the ball to get over the fences at the major leagues, then that kind of takes away a big part of his game. And now he's trying to sell out for power. And if he has to sell out for power more and really make his swing more power oriented, then that probably changes just exactly what he can cover.
I know you don't like WAR, especially when it comes to first baseman, but Vaughn has played over 300 games. He's almost at 350. Yeah, he's at 355 games in his career. And his career WAR total is minus 0.8 on Fangraphs. Like he doesn't hit well enough to overcome his other shortfalls. And Matt in the YouTube comments section wrote to us, Andrew, you can't run, play defense, or hit at a demonstrable above average level. So what would you say you do here? And Matt raises a good point because Yohan Moncada was not in the Charlotte Knights lineup tonight on Thursday. And it makes me wonder if we could possibly see Moncada this weekend in Minneapolis. And when Moncada comes, I don't think they're going to ride him on the bench. I think Moncada would play, and he'd play at third base. And then it raises the question, what do you do with Jake Burger? Do you DH him? Well, you kind of can't because Eloy needs to play. And if they're worried about his groin, well, he's going to be the DH. He's not going to play in the outfield. Mm-hmm. So suddenly you don't have a spot for Jake Burger. And this is where I would make the argument that maybe with the foot bruise, you give more time off to Andrew Vaughn in his upcoming series against Minneapolis. You have Jake Burger grab the first baseman glove and move over from third to first. But going into the offseason, man, Vaughn's just like inviting this conversation of who would you rather have your regular first baseman be, Andrew Vaughn or Jake Burger? And what kind of drives me wild with all of these posts about the White Sox being sellers, like all these articles and blogs and columns that the White Sox have untouchables and Andrew Vaughn's one of the untouchables. And I know we've asked this question many times, Jim, but why? Like, what are they seeing that we don't? Like, the data doesn't lie on Baseball Savant, and we're not twisting it to fit some type of narrative that we have. Everyone can see that this guy struggles against spin, and spin's more important than ever. And to compare again between Vaughn and Luis Robert, yeah, Luis Robert has a high whiff rate against sliders, but Luis Robert is batting over 270 against sliders, and he's slugging well over 500. As a matter of fact, against right-handed pitching this year, the White Sox as a team have hit 15 homers against sliders. Luis Robert has 8 of them, and he just demonstrated Wednesday night against Justin Verlander on a pitcher's pitch, a slider in the outside corner, and Robert demolished it. So I know I sigh, but they spent the 3rd overall pick on Andrew Vaughn. He was supposed to hit, and I've always worried that maybe the White Sox, in their poor planning, would break what was supposed to be one of their top hitting prospects. And that concern becomes more real with every passing day. Like, I need a hot month for Andrew Vaughn to feel better about myself regarding Vaughn, but I don't know what he is in the upcoming future, and I still don't understand why he's untouchable.
Yeah, I'm not a swing doctor, but like when you watch Luis Robert hit a pitch and you watch Andrew Vaughn hit a pitch and you see like the, Robert's ability to flip a slider out to left field, and like Vaughn tries the same thing and ends up 15 feet shorter on the warning track. Same thing with like opposite field drives, the way Robert's flies just kind of carry and Vaughn just kind of don't. Like, to me, that kind of sums up the whole just swing leverage and the levers that Robert has with the longer arms, reach, bat path that like Vaughn doesn't have, and the way that power doesn't come as easily to him. And one thing, I'm looking at Vaughn's numbers here for July: 188, 204, 208, his slash line, 15 strikeouts, 0 walks in 49 plate appearances. And the thing is, like, walks had come back to him a little bit, and he had a decent divide with his walks and strikeouts to where like that part of his game seemed to be coming along, like the guy who makes plate appearances a little more challenging to pitchers. Like, he was showing that, and now it's disappeared on him. And his tendency for second half fades makes me think like, yeah, put him on the injured list. I know the White Sox hate doing that to anybody who doesn't have to miss, like, if they're going to be anything less than 10 days out, like, they will not put him on the injured list. They'd rather have him sit for 8 days rather than put him on 10-day IL. But I think I'd rather see Vaughn on the injured list right now to give him a breather. Like, he seems to wear down, and if he has like a identifiable physical issue, you can hang an injured list stint on to where nobody's gonna be questioning it. Like, why not? So why not the added benefit? You need to play Burger anyway. If he's playing well, you need to play Jimenez. If he's playing well, and you have to protect his legs. So yeah, I mean, give him those opportunities. They're, in due time, like, probably Jimenez will get hurt again, and those at-bats will come back. So you only have to wait a little bit. Moncada might get hurt again, because I'm not buying that his back is all the way back. A lot of ways to get guys in the lineup. So if Vaughn has to be the one who takes a seat, you can probably do it without like insulting him or like giving up on him. But yeah, I really don't get the, untouchable part. And yeah, I've seen, people in the Sox seeing comments saying like, well, maybe he's not like untouchable in the classic sense, but like the White Sox aren't going to move him for anything less than his value. But like, that's basically everybody. And like, like Moncada, they won't. Like, his value is very low, but they won't move him for less than his value. Just teams like he has no value, so teams aren't offering anything. Like, that's kind of just, when you mention somebody's untouchable in the same breath as Dylan Cease and Luis Robert and even Eloy Jimenez, although I'd be open to dealing him too based on his inability to stay on the field or provide defensive value. I don't think he's that far away from Vaughn to where like, he's safe and Vaughn isn't. It just seems like it is a case where they really want the guy they drafted 3rd overall to be that guy. And I guess fortunately, they probably haven't passed up any killer deals or like any awesome trade windows to where like they could have moved him like Gordon Beckham when the years he was like a top prospect or top young player, and then he kind of faded into like a defense first infielder utility guy. Like there wasn't that window to where like trading Vaughn made a whole lot of sense. So they can probably just keep waiting to see if like he catches fire and then like see what happens. But the question is whether he catches fire, I think, is an open one, especially like if he has another year where he fades in the second half and just hasn't proven that he can actually survive a 6-month grind and provide offense that you expect from a first baseman.
He's 25, Jim.
Yeah.
We're talking about a 25-year-old that's struggling to survive the Major League Baseball grind in his fourth season.
Well, I mean, like it's Carlos Rodon kind of the same way. Like they rushed in the majors and did not actually have him like develop a routine. You develop like healthy habits that kept him functional for 6 months. Like he didn't learn that until like his back was against the wall and he was non-tendered. Yeah. And like Vaughn is kind of the same thing. Like they just rushed him through. Like he had like 50 something games in the minors, his first year, but just like he had not proven he could survive a 6-month grind. And he seems like he's just getting by, like, nursing back an injury or trying to battle through leg issues, like time and time again, like dealing with issues with his base. And, maybe that would manifest itself even if you're doing a full season in the minors, but like, because he's fighting this 2-front war between like doing his best against major league pitching and also, managing his body for longer and longer seasons for him as he plays more and more. Like it's hard to separate one from the other, and maybe they go hand in hand, and just it's going to take like another situation like Rodon experience where like by the very end it'll click. And part of the reason it didn't click is because the White Sox bypass opportunities to block him and make him earn his way up and didn't.
Yeah, if he is untouchable, if he is part of their core, if they're hoping that they're going to turn this around in 2024 or even in 2025, this is a problem. You got to figure out Andrew Vaughn. You have to assist him here, that he stays on the field. And not only does he stay on the field, he's an impact bat, because he's not an impact bat. And he's not an impact bat because every right-handed pitcher and every team in Major League Baseball knows that after you throw a fastball and if he doesn't put it into play, it's spin city, baby. Just throw sliders and sweepers at him. He can't hurt you. And he's got a lot of work to do in the offseason. But to your point, he goes into arbitration next year. He's in his 4th year of team control, and then it's his 5th year, and then it's his 6th year, and that's his walk year. Like, we're halfway through the team control for Andrew Vaughn. We still don't know how good he is, but he hasn't been very good in his first 3 years in the majors.
Yeah,
like,
or we hope we don't know how good he is, I think is the way I'd put it. Like, I hope he's better than this, but progress has been difficult to maintain.
Right. So we can throw away all the excuses. Well, he played in the outfield last year. That's not a viable excuse. There's something else going on. And I think it is this data. It's this spin. It's how the teams are attacking him. And Vaughn is still having difficulty countering that or making the adjustments to be able to do that. And I think that's a big reason why Luis Robert is having the season that he's having, because he's always been known to crush velocity. And now if you're a righty, sliders aren't even that effective against Luis Robert in this time. So moving away from the White Sox talk real quick, and we've been kind of hinting at this, and we've had some good comments in the YouTube channel that I'm going to go back to. So Matt put out this comment regarding the Major League Baseball trade market and posed the question: a bunch of teams still decided between buying and selling. Are the White Sox missing an opportunity by not selling now before the market is flooded? And Jim, the way I approach this topic is, as a seller, you have a price point in mind for the players that you are putting out to the market. And until you get that type of return or an offer from another team that satisfies what you will be asking for, that determines how much you move. The only way you're going to make movement in this market from a White Sox perspective is suddenly step back from your requested ask from teams. Is this the time they should do that? I mean, based on Matt's question, should they step back a little bit from their request, or should they stay firm?
I think it depends. Like, Tim Anderson, no, like no reason to sell him for anything, trade him for anything less than he's worth. Like, they have control over him with the option. They can, they have a whole next winter and a whole next deadline to deal him. So like, this is not do or die. Lance Lynn, another guy who his market is very limited. He doesn't seem like he is likely to start a postseason game unless like he's facing an all right-handed lineup. So like, his option probably not that valuable. So yeah, probably deal him. Like Lucas Giolito, I think is like the one where he's worth something and no other team is moving. Like you need buyers who are offering a worthwhile price. And if the White Sox traded him for like a off top 100 list just to make a move, like nobody's gonna be happy with that. So like, I think, Rick Hahn's reputation precedes himself as somebody who doesn't close deals, as somebody who can't find the price he wants to meet and just gets gun shy and nobody moves and in the same roster rolls over and nothing changes. But I think, Lynn, yeah, move him, save the money. Anderson, no. Giolito, no. I think that's kind of how I look at it. Like if the team wants to take Lance Lynn and they're offering like somebody, like whether it's a live arm, whether it's a teenager who's like off the radar, maybe another Fernando Tatis Jr., who knows? But like, sure, lottery ticket, go for it, go nuts. But players of worth, I don't see. If teams are deciding whether between buying and selling, like you need more buyers then. Like if they're not convinced they want to buy, like you can't shove Lucas Giolito and say like, how about a sale? How about a sale? Like, he's worth a certain price. Like, so I think like, yeah, that's why like it gets impatient. Like I'm also worried that, the White Sox will tie their own hands, but yeah, Giolito is worth something. And the savings is nominal with him. The value he provides to their team is rather strong. And also the White Sox had the fallback option of the qualifying offer to at least get something at the very end if nothing happens, to where like they do have the slightest bit of leverage and they may as well exercise that in a way that like Lance Lynn, probably no leverage there.
So to your point about, the White Sox announcing a sale, my first job was working at Kmart, and I would have to do the blue light special reads over the intercom system. So just a little comical to me, be funny, be like, attention MLB shoppers, there's a blue light special at 35th and Shields in Chicago. You need a starting pitcher? We've got a couple. Back in the day, reading Pepsi ads, 5 for $10, perfect for your 4th of July barbecue,
Final sale. No returns, as is.
Not refundable. There have been some trades back in the day. No, to your other point, though, the concern, and I'm starting to see it grow a little bit on social media, with every passing day that the White Sox don't trade anyone, I think people are getting this feeling, and I sense it, and I feel a little bit too. Could this be a repeat of last year's trade market? And nobody gets moved. And it just raises a lot of questions of like, what are we doing here? Like, and it invites speculation, keyword. Is Rick Hahn really in charge? Like, who's in charge again with the White Sox? Is he allowed to make trades? Who knows? It's is this a weekend at Bernie's type of situation?
Yeah, the good news is that Hahn has been more active when he's sold versus when he's buying. Like I'm thinking of like the Jose Quintana trade. People got nervous about that, and eventually he made it happen. And the price was like the Cubs met his price, and a lot of people were antsy about carrying Quintana into the season and waiting until July to move him, but they moved him. And like, even though that trade is, not worked out the way White Sox thought, and like with Jimenez winning like silver sluggers and hitting 40 homers and being an all-star, like it's still a very good trade. Like maybe his best deadline work and his best like rebuild work, like that's an outstanding trade. He did move Todd Frazier, on the return for that one, not as good, but like he did move him. Miguel Gonzalez, they move him. So like whenever it doesn't make sense to carry a guy, like those guys end up getting moved typically. So I think something's going to happen. But yeah, that's why I'm not getting too anxious, even if like Hahn's reputation does precede it himself. And also like, we don't exactly know whether the White Sox will talk themselves into trying to do more at this roster and run it back, because they keep getting stuck on this roster, even though there have been cries for help for the last couple of years in terms of what this team needs, and the White Sox not doing what this team needs.
Well, our last topic in this episode of Sox Machine Live before we hand it off for those that are watching the live stream at 8 o'clock, you can watch our friends from the 108 on youtube.com/from the 108 as they'll start their show. Our last topic, we preview the upcoming series against the Minnesota Twins as the Chicago White Sox arrive to Minneapolis for the final time in 2023 thanks to the ballot schedule. And looking at the American League Central standings here, the Minnesota Twins are 50-48, and they still lead the Central by 2 games over the Cleveland Guardians, which the Guardians, I have no idea how they're hovering around 500, but they're 47-49 now, despite the injuries that they've had to Tristan McKenzie and now Shane Bieber. Detroit is 44-52. They're 5 games back. And there's the White Sox at 41-57. They're 9 games back of the Minnesota Twins. So even if the White Sox sweep the Twins this weekend, they're still going to be 6 games back of Minnesota in first place. It just raises the question, though, when you look at the AL Central standings, Jim, like, what in the world are the Twins doing here? Like, why are they not running away with this division? There are so many flaws right now. Poor Cleveland is hurt. Detroit is Detroit, and the White Sox are the White Sox, and the Royals are prepping to have a top 3 pick in next year's MLB draft. And here are the Royals. I mean, the Twins are still 2 games above 500, but they're only 2 games ahead of the Guardians, and we're approaching the 100-game mark. Like, they're obviously the most fit team and the strongest team in this division to win the AL Central, but they have yet to run away from everyone. And this was the same type of position they were in last year. And in September, Cleveland got insanely hot and ran away with the AL Central. Like, I'm a bit concerned for the Twins here. They keep Cleveland hanging around. Could it happen again, just like last year, which Cleveland wins it at the last minute?
I think with Cleveland, the one thing that keeps me from like jumping on them is like Bieber's out, McKenzie, you know, just like their top line pitchers, their Cy Young candidate pitchers aren't quite there, which is what's been bolstering them in the past to be like as strong as they are, despite not being that impressive on paper. With the Twins, my concern about them is like they had lights out pitching in the first half. Now you're seeing like Sonny Gray have a couple of rough outings in a row. So maybe he's regressing to be like that ERA closer to 4 than 3 guy that he's been. Also another guy who like, you know, doesn't normally pitch past 6 innings all that often. Joe Ryan regressing some. Pablo Lopez had the really hot start, got the extension. Now he's cooling off. Like their pitching that didn't seem to be as strong as it started. Like it's fading a little bit to be ordinary, still okay, still formidable. Like look at a 3-game series of starters and say like, yeah, the White Sox had their work cut out for them, like beating these starters, but they're showing like that they aren't world beaters, that they aren't like all-stars yet. And when they were pitching as well as they were, the offense wasn't there. Now you see like Carlos Correa heating up the offense, starting to figure out like a lineup a little bit. Max Kepler heating up, Julian coming in and posting some impressive rookie numbers that other Twins rookies haven't been able to do. And now the pitching's fading a little bit. So I think it's a little bit of whack-a-mole in terms of what their problem is, and you're not being able to put it all together and have that like killer winning streak that puts them securely over 500, puts a big cushion between first and second place. The White Sox did fall 10 games back briefly. So like, I think that's kind of the red line for the White Sox being like, nope, not going to happen. I think you can officially pull the plug on that. But I think like, as far as Cleveland goes, like just Terry Francona is really good at making a lot with little. And that's, I think, like his biggest skill, why the Guardians have been so good. The front office works really well with him to figure out like who he needs and how much that guy can play and still be helpful. And that's why I think like, I don't see who does that for the Guardians now, but we've had that question before. Like, how are the Guardians going to do this? And they do it. So yeah, I think the Twins and me not being a big fan of Rocco Baldelli just as a strategist and somebody who leverages talent to the way that like Francona leverages talent. Like I don't see the Twins running away with it, even though like, yeah, they should in terms of like who's actually available and who's contributing.
The pitching probables for the White Sox in this series are going to have their best. Lance Lynn will make the start on Friday night. That's a 7:10 p.m. Central Time start. On Saturday, Dylan Cease will get the ball on July 22nd. That's a 6:15 p.m. Central Time start. And on Sunday, we'll have another watch party along with our friends from the 108 on playback.tv/Sox Machine. Lucas Giolito will make that start. As we talked about at the beginning part of the show, we're hoping for a bounce back for Lucas Giolito. That'll be pretty important for his trade market, just to see if teams get excited if he does pitch well and decide to pull the trigger and make a move before Giolito makes another start, which will be at home, and that will be his last probable start before the trade deadline. And of course, we'll be recapping that game between the series, I should say, between the White Sox and the Twins on Monday Sox Machine podcast. We'll also again see if there's any trades that are made. The market has been incredibly slow around the league. Hopefully we get some type of activity. Baltimore traded for a reliever from Oakland. I did see that. But again, not a whole lot. The hot stove is lukewarm at the moment. So hopefully there's some more activity so we have something exciting to talk about. And of course, we'll preview that crosstown series between the Chicago White Sox and the Chicago Cubs, which I'm thinking the Cubs are going to be selling too. So that adds some intrigue for that 2-game series.
Hug watch.
Yes, Hug Watch. That's what people pay the big bucks for, to go to Guarantee Rate Field for the Cubs White Sox games. Drink a lot of beer, watch some fights, Hug Watch. Those are the 3 big things for Cubs White Sox games. But that will do it for this episode of Sox Machine Live. Thank you guys so much, especially for those that watched the live stream on youtube.com/Sox Machine. If you do get a chance to watch any of our videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. We're on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at Sox Machine. You can follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh. Those are also our Instagram handles and our threads. So if you're into threads, we're on threads. You can follow us at that handle as well. If you don't get a chance to watch Sox Machine Live as far as the video, or if you just want to hear our voices and not see our faces, I don't blame you. You can listen to the podcast and subscribe to the Sox Machine podcast wherever you listen to podcasts such as Spotify and Apple Music. If you enjoy our show and want more, you can get more by becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Sox Machine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content, ad-free versions of both the website and the podcast. And when we have new Sox Machine swag, like the I Heart Wild Pitch Offense shirts, the first ones to receive it, monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. Sox Machine Live is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're on for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for watching and listening.